there is a collective action problem. They understand that, but they have no capacity of doing anything about it. So where is the root of this failure? That's what my soliloquy will be about.
Yeah.
Now, look, as a Greek who demonstrated the streets of Athens in the 1970s against NATO and against the entry of into the European Union, because we could see that the European Union was not really what it said on the tin. It was, let's not forget that to get into the European Union, which was presented as a union that offered the hope of a sovereign Europe, a Europe sovereign, both from the Soviet Union, but also from the United States. That was really all a facade. To get into NATO, into the EU, you had to get first into NATO. Spain, Greece, later North Macedonia. It goes a long way. So the EU was always tethered to the United States. That's not new. Okay. It was a prerequisite for joining the EU to go into NATO, ensuring American military hegemony in the European continent. That was standard practice. Under the Cold War, and you and John Mearsheimer and others have explained this magnificently, the ruling classes, the elites of the United States and Europe, were aligned along two lines. There was a common need for a security zone, as you put it in a recent article, as opposed to an influence zone, vis-a-vis the Soviet Union.
I'm watching.
At the same time, that's one line. The second line was during Bretton Woods, the 50s
watching
and
this
60s.
clip on Europe's increased in military spending and what that means for the geopolitical situation, and the recent visit of what's his name, Marco Rubio, to Europe. Just what these things mean, or at least these people's analysis of it. I don't know if there's a objective what they mean, but rather these people's analysis of it. Anyway, that's what we're watching here. So,
how are we doing?
Europe played a very significant role as the recycler of American surpluses, while America had trade surpluses. And then after Bretton Woods, a recycler of America's deficits. This was important. So there was alignment. In 2008, we have a shift of both these lines of alignment from where I'm standing. The Americans, the American administration no longer feared Russia after they crashed it. And you have explained brilliantly in the past how the United States in the early 1990s chose to crash Russia. But they needed NATO expansion to extend American hegemony over Europe, and Germany in particular. So they pushed Russia, essentially pressurized it, poked the bear, as they say, through NATO expansion. Now, Germany doesn't fear Russia either in that period. But because it has become, by the 1990s, fully dependent on American trade deficits for its mercantilist business model, it goes along with NATO expansion. And this expansion shifts NATO eastwards. And now we have something really interesting. Everybody knows, you more than anyone, that we used to have a north-south divide in the European Union. With this expansion eastwards,
again, all this clip is about, so these two guys, their background, this guy used to be the former economic or secretary of the economy or something adjacent to that for Greece. He's written some books about global economic policy and so on and so forth. And this guy is a professor at an Ivy League university, or at least was, and has also written books on global economics as well. They're discussing Marco Rubio's speech in Germany, the one that my most recent post is about. And they're talking about Europe's increase in military spending. That's the background.
Baltics, for instance, but also Poland to some extent. They realized, as ruling elites, that they could, within the European Union, punch above their weight by being close to the United States, close to the project of NATO, hyper-expansion. And thus they managed to achieve, take Estonia, take Lithuania, a lot more influence within Brussels by helping the United States cause friction with Russia. And at the same time, jeopardizing, also in the interests of several American administrations, the strength of German-French axis. Now, from a Europe divided in north-south, now we are also
Spice God dizzy.
east-west. And when we have 2008 and 2009, and we have Wall Street collapsing and then the Franco-German banks going pear-shaped, and then we have the domino effect with the pigs, us, the Irish, and so on. The response by Europe, given that its business model was mercantilist and it depended on American trade deficits to sell Mercedes-Benzes from Germany to the United States, we have hyper-austerity, we have debt breaks, we have bailouts, leading Europe to the huge slump. And at that point, remember, 2013, 2014, the Obama Nuland administration, let's put it, in terms of Eastern Europe, is keep pushing for NATO expansion to leverage American hegemony vis-a-vis Berlin and Paris. I remember, your friend Jack Lew telling me in uncertain terms that Berlin must stop exporting deflation to the United States. This was, back then when you and I first met. And this was a time with the Maidan coup that you have explained brilliantly again. Something that Merkel realized it was not in Germany's interest. And the way in which the Minsk Accords were gutted against her own agenda. So we have a situation where by the late 2010s, we have a Europe that is becoming more austerian.
So he's giving some background on how, or the context in which Europe's economic policy changed. And all he's summing up is to say that Europe increased austerity, and all that means is that they spend less. The government spends less. Typically, when the government spends less, this means the government is going to. Yeah, I don't like any of these people. I don't have any personal attachment to them. I listen to the merit of their ideas and move on as it's necessary. But all austerity means is government is going to spend less, and typically when governments spend less, they are
Big Philly is getting spicy.
they are taken away from the public funds, like Social Security, welfare, anything that benefits working class people. That's where they cut the funds. They never stop spending in terms of military spending or subsidies to corporations and higher technology enterprises and things of that nature. When we talk government austerity, which only means government spends less, really all that means in plain terms is that the government is cutting money from the public goods. That's all.
More stagnant, it misses every opportunity to consolidate, to create proper fiscal union and political union. And in 2019, Ursula von der Leyen comes in with a Green Deal that never really existed. It was a figment of her imagination. That is not the engine of growth that is necessary. And the result now is that we have 25 years of negative net investment, including in Germany. We have deindustrialization. The East-West chasm is deepening ever since the war, not the first one in 2014, but especially the second one in 2022 with an increase in energy prices. Effectively, the United States became the energy supplier from fracked natural gas and oil.
These guys are talking about the Munich conference. They're talking about Europe's increased military spending and
Dojo Verse says no way it's Weon Zilliamson.
decrease spending in like public sector things like Social Security, welfare, things like that.
Suddenly have no plan.
How would you call?
Their last silver lining is to convert Volkswagen factories that no longer are capable of producing cars because of the lack of investment all those years, that can compete with BYD, with even American cars like Tesla. And they pass on these factories, these production lines to Rheinmetall to produce Leopard tanks in order to minimize the rate of industrialization.
canvas.
And that's how the peace project becomes.
Aren't we all?
Big Philly says a Dojo verse host.
That's my rant as to why is it that they are incapable of even having the conversation that they must have in order
Dojo
to
versus not the host.
even
Or yeah,
make
he's talking about me.
imaginable the notion of European
He's saying
sovereignty.
I look like Zion. That's their running joke. Welcome.
Well, I think that's brilliant and correct. And let me just add
Big Philly
a
says
few points around that. I think we need to go back to April 12, 1945 to start. That's the day that Franklin Roosevelt died.
Yep.
He
Big
actually
Philly
had
says
a
IDEC
different
for the Nets.
idea about the world. He was the only
Oh, he's a
really
basketball player.
great leader of the United States in the 20th century. And he had the idea that
Big Philly says
Kennedy
got it.
could have been, by the way, had they not murdered him in the CIA, but Roosevelt really was. And he had the idea that there could be global cooperation and that he could get along with Joe Stalin and he could get along with Chiang Kai-shek, but if Mao came to power, he would have gotten
These guys, yeah. So this idea that Sachs is putting forth right now to say that, like, touting Roosevelt as this extraordinary leader. I mean, in terms of how the elites have played the game of statecraft and ran their countries, sure, but I don't think he was drastically different. He created a welfare state, and in doing so, stopped the country from mutually assured destruction. But he did so because it was necessary. It was necessary. You can't have a working class or a peasant class that's so destitute as to not be able to subsist enough to work. All that's to say, you can't have workers if the workers don't have enough food to move their bodies to go to work. The system doesn't work. And so Roosevelt needed to create infrastructure to allow that machine to keep on turning. That's all. That's all he did. He just another guy doing the job.
Big Philly says he put a Band-Aid on the system.
Yeah, exactly. He perpetuated the system, put a Band-Aid on it so it can keep working as it was designed. And that's pretty much all he did. He expanded the American empire. He expanded American economic dominance. If we start to get into the weeds of why World War II happened, it's because of America. It's because of America. It's because we held all of Europe hostage through these war debts. And in doing so, we starved Germany, and Hitler used that as a pretense for waging war against the world. And when everyone was sufficiently destitute after the war and the United States was the only economy that was productive, we cemented ourselves as the global empire, as the Third Reich. Rome was the first. The British Empire was the second. The United States supplanted the British Empire from World War I to World War II. That's Roosevelt's legacy.
along with Mao too, because he was a person who thought that the world needed cooperation and peace. Well, when he died, the new and about to become U.S. security state took over and explained to Mr. Truman,
that MFAT.
who was a nice man, completely not ready for that job, that we were in a struggle for survival with communism, and that this was the great challenge.
this like romanticization of these political actors is extremely frustrating. Right? He characterizes Truman is a nice man. Shut up, brother. What are you talking about? This, and I don't know if it's like an old age thing with people in these intellectual circles, and they're all super polite and yada yada yada. But like, I don't. What are we talking about? He's a nice guy. Talk about the consequences of his actions, and those are just facts, right? Like the consequences of their actions are just facts. Your speculative analysis can only speak to the motivations of those actions, which we gain a clearer picture of through the consequences of them and the sort of context of these people's lives. But like, I don't care about like what your take is on if he was a nice guy or bad guy. It doesn't fucking matter. What are the consequences of his actions? How does it impact the lives of the people that they rule over? That's all that matters.
Challenge. And the United States embarked on a global hegemonic aspiration to defeat global communism and to run the world.
You see is okay. So the United States was every country, if they can, for the most part, will seek dominance. The United States was already doing global imperial dominance. I mean, like, anyone learn about how we became trade partners with Japan? We sent some general on a big ass ship with humongous guns to Japan. This is when Japan was isolationist. And we were like, if you don't open your trade routes to us, we will bombard your country nonstop. And they're like, okay, sure. That's what empires do. We were already expanding our economic dominance in the 1800s. So like this wasn't like some new thing. Like they woke up and decided, oh, like, should we take over the world, guys? No. It was a slow and gradual process starting from the inception of the country. Yeah, maybe like there wasn't this like grand plan, but they were acting in the interests of the elites within their borders, and those interests are aligned with expanded markets and expanding economic and military control, which inevitably creates a global superpower. That's how that game ends.
Challenge. And the United States embarked on a global hegemonic aspiration to defeat global communism and to run the world. And that was the policy. Rather than a cooperative approach, we're going to divide the world as long as it takes in order to prevail in a struggle.
99.9999% of U.S. diplomacy is gunboat diplomacy. Is gunboat diplomacy, is gunship diplomacy, is missile, Apache helicopter aircraft diplomacy. It's violence. And that's not like a special knock on the US. That's what governments do. That's what they do. The ones who are really good at this whole statecraft game, they kill each other and they take power. That's what they do. Every empire before them has done that. Some people will like tend to characterize this and that empire as especially bad in this one way or another. And it's like, sure, maybe one empire used this tool more efficiently than another. But at the end of the day, they all engage in death and destruction by policy, by the very thing that they're doing is engaging in death and destruction for the supremacy of the elites within their borders. That's the gist of it. That's the gist of it. Everything else is fluff.
For survival. And in 1947, the CIA was created out of the OSS to carry forward that mission. And the CIA is our most important foreign policy agency in the US, and it has been since 1947, because it's completely unaccountable, it's secret, you can do a lot, you can have long-term plans, failure doesn't matter, there's no accountability. And basically, the CIA led the aspiration for U.S. global hegemony,
Hold on, I gotta
with the
adjust
difficult
this
point
stuff
that there
real
was
quickly.
first a country with atomic bombs in 1949, and then thermonuclear weapons a few years later. So there was a real competitor from a military point of view. By the way, that did not stop many American leaders from saying we should have a first strike against the Soviet Union, even in the context of mass nuclear war. We had crazy people in charge, and that's a very important point to remember about the United States. This is barely a sane country much of the time. And we went on a mission in the United States, and the mission was global domination. At the time, that seemed to mean the US and Europe and Russia were the domain or the theater of interest. All the rest, China, India, Africa, impoverished, not to be thought about much. Perhaps you need some uranium from Africa or some other minerals, but otherwise nothing much to worry about. The world was the US, Europe, Soviet Union, and the struggle was over that. And the US became an imperium and basically run by what Eisenhower told us, the military-industrial complex. And important, that idea that there's a military-industrial complex, okay, it's a passé.
So the military-industrial complex is an apparatus for corporate
How we doing?
financial proliferation and state
Big Billy.
imperial dominance. It's actually ingenious tool of statecraft, because what it does is it recycles it generates capital while maintaining military dominance and funneling said capital to the elites, right? That's how it works. The military is a gargantuan institution that's constantly sucking up resources, okay? But how does the military like produce things? They don't produce much, actually. They outsource their production to national companies. So you have your Raytheons, you have your Microsoft, you have your GMC, you name it, right? These national companies produce products, consumer goods, military equipment for the military. All right. Well, where's that money coming from? Obviously, the government. Where does the government get the money? By taxing the people. Who are the people that are, by and large, being taxed? It's not the 1%, the ones who own the very companies we're talking about that the military money goes to. It's the working class, right? So the military then serves as an apparatus to funnel money from the general populace through the government to the military back to the elites, and in so doing strengthening elite position and dominance at the top because they gain more and more wealth, and increasing the military state. The military gets more high technology, more guns, more bombs, you name it. That also protects elite power because they control the military through the government. They also control the government. They use this military to go around the world, terrorize, torment, kill, secure their dominance. And they divide, conquer, pillage, and profit. Repeat. Divide, conquer, pillage, profit, and repeat.
Budget every year.
Yes. Why? Why is that the only thing that they can agree on? Because that's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that matters. Nothing else. Everything else is fluff. Everything else is fluff. That's the only thing that matters. So they always agree on it because they know everything else is a game. This is where it's at. This is how we make the big money. They divide, conquer, pillage, and profit. They do it internally. They do it externally. That's all it is. There's no like that's the simplest way of describing the general picture. Yes, there are more details that we can get into, but like for the purposes of everyday people understanding what the issue is, that's all we need to be communicating. Once we start getting into the weeds of who was a good guy and who wasn't, like we're fucking losing the point. We've lost the plot.
Big Philly says
Because
the
that
American
was,
people okay
first-
with it because we're so brainwashed.
We're brainwashed like no one has ever been brainwashed in their lives. I mean, that's another tool of statecraft, right? The elites need to control their population so that they don't rise up and overthrow them. And the way they do that is by pacifying and placating their population so that the population is apathetic, the population is unengaged. They divide through like stoking resentment and hate. They distract through entertainment and spectacle, and they pacify either through violent repression. They'd rather not do that because that kind of gives away the game. And they pacify through this sort of nationalist hubris. Oh, we're the best. We can do no wrong. You should be proud to be an American. And if you don't like it, go somewhere else. We're the best country ever. You should count yourself lucky, yada, yada. So people sit down and shut up and they're like, well, I guess it's really good here. I mean, if I was anywhere else, like, I guess it wouldn't be so great.
Alerted 64 years ago
Big Philly
in
says in fear. They want
Eisenhower's
to make us
farewell
always
address.
afraid of
But
some
I do,
outside threat
to
that's
this
going to
moment,
destroy
find
us.
it astounding.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And fear, right? Like the scary other, this, like communism has served for the longest time. They call it the Red Scare, has served for the longest time as this scary boogeyman. Other immigrants has served for a long time as the scary boogeyman, other in concert with communism. Yeah, those are the tools. That's what they do. It's let's rinse and repeat. Let's rinse. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they haven't changed much. They've made some things more efficient, and they're trying to make it even more efficient with. Yes, exactly. Then it became terrorism. Precisely.
That our lead general, he was the supreme Allied commander of World War II, is the one that told the American people, watch out, watch what's really here, because he knew that there was trouble. He could barely keep his control over a civilian government, even as the supreme Allied commander. He could barely keep control over his own government at that point. The CIA was already out of control. And he was trying, by the way, in the last year of his administration, to find some way out of the nuclear arms race with Khrushchev. And the CIA either subverted it or botched it with the U-2 spy mission. When Eisenhower said, don't do that, I'm going to a summit with Khrushchev.
So there is a deep state, right? But it's not some like conspiracy cabal. There is a deep state. The deep state is the bureaucratic machine that stays in place through the various administrations. And they make plans that are like decades in advance. And the presidents come in and they simply enact these plans. The people who are put in place in these various institutions and are put forth to lead them are hand chosen by the elites. They are educated at elite universities where they make sure that specific ideas are spread and proliferated, and professors and academics who reflect these ideas are the ones who are put in those positions to teach them. The pupils who best sort of synthesize and reflect and resonate with these ideas are propelled and advanced to the top of the system, such that you don't really need this like textbook kind of corruption. You condition them to be corrupt such that they think these things are their own ideas, right? Like the journalists that work for corporate media, they're not lying. They believe these things they're saying, but they were put in those positions because they believe those things that they're saying. And they believe those things that they're saying because they've been socially conditioned their entire lives to believe those things that they're saying. It just becomes a self-perpetuating system. It's ingenious, but it's not that hard to see it happening.
He says right.
It's not that hard to see it happening because the pattern repeats again and again and again and again and again. You simply have to kind of step back and stop buying into all the myths.
Jeff. And Alan Dulles, who was one of the darkest figures of American history, said to Eisenhower, "Don't worry, Mr. President, if they ever would shoot down a U-2, which they can't, a spy plane, it's designed to disintegrate, so there'll be nothing left. The pilot could never survive. And if the pilot were by some strange fluke to survive, he's carrying a cyanide pill and he would die." So the U-2 was shot down. Eisenhower came out and said, well, the Soviets said we shot down a spy plane. Eisenhower came out and said, no, that was a weather plane from a weather station in Turkey that went off course. And then the Soviets produced Gary Powers alive. Does this context in some way enrich your understanding of these issues? No. Like at this point, these guys are hanging out, jerking each other off, and like this is left wing academia, right? Is this like, and like now I'm speaking about these people personally, but it's less about these individuals and more about how elite circles concentrate power, and even the ones who espouse left wing ideals suffer from these same things that keep the system the way it is. These guys like hanging out, shooting the shit, and he's like going into all of the stories that he knows about. Oh, and like, do you know how this happened? And like, here's this interesting factoid. Gives a fuck. Who cares? Who cares? Who cares? Why does it matter? Why does it matter? How does it help enrich and illuminate your understanding of the general issue? But this is what we have. This is what we have to offer, and this is what people are used to. This is what they think sort of intellectual analysis is. It's like, let me give you random arbitrary details that like are sort of tangentially related to what we're talking about, but I'm just like spewing random factoids, but you're entertained, so you fucking turned your brain off and you're like, yeah, like Eisenhower did that. Oh, cool. Like, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? And this is everywhere. And like these people, they have ideas that it's my personal opinion, I think are like have utility for enriching people's understanding. There's I don't remember the quote, but there's a line in one of Ta-Nehisi Coates' books that really resonated with me because he talks about the responsibility of a journalist. And these guys at this point are ostensibly journalists. He talks about the responsibility of a journalist being to illuminate, but so often journalists confound, right? They confuse people because they speak in jargon and these technical terms and they flex their niche knowledge and intellectual prowess, and none of that shit fucking matters. None of that matters. How are you making these things easier to understand in a way that people can
act upon. That's what matters. That's what matters. One person that does that extremely well, who I just came across recently, is this lady. If I can find her.
We know right now that we have
This lady. I think I followed the page associated with this foundation that she found. She is hell bent on explaining these issues. The guests she have on are okay, but like, in terms of explaining the issues, some of them go too academic about it. And obviously this is not going to be something that has a huge following, because like if it did, there would be a revolution. Like right now, if this page had Mr. Beast numbers, there would be a revolution happening, because all of these people will have a keen understanding of the economic state of things, and they would not be having it. But like, that's 20.5K subscribers, because one, these platforms suppress this content, and people simply do not have the background to, one, be able to conceive of it, and two, there's too much noise, there's too much distraction.
When are we going to say enough is enough, instead of sitting back and
Big
say
Billy says yeah.
they'll fix it? Well, they broke it. Why? They don't have any intention to fix it, right? So I think there are a lot of questions we have to answer as a housing movement here in the U.S. We just need a home. Well, you don't have a home because of this economic system that we live under, and you have to understand how it operates, right? And you have to understand the role of workers in society. The more I talk about the role of workers in society and how you are making the 1% wealthier, and your accumulation of stuff, for lack of a better way to say it, is really working against you. And I think now folks are starting to wake up to these issues in a way that I hadn't seen them wake up to in years.
in the United States, even more strongly than in other places, it's the war against the poor and the criminalization of poverty. Right now, we are living in escalation of this war. The new administrative order called Ending Crime and Disorder of American Streets of July 2025
Big Philly says
is
it's
meant
hard to not
to
feel hopeless
punish
being an anti-capitalist.
those who do not have.
It's extremely difficult to not feel hopeless. But I think that is part of the fight. That is part of the resistance. And that is part of what they try to do, is make you feel hopeless. Because if we feel hopeless, the people who have a better understanding of how these things work, if we feel hopeless, if we feel like, why do I even talk about it? Like, sometimes I get up here and I'm extremely frustrated. But if we don't say anything, who will? Who will? Who will? It'll just continue forever. So we have to. And we can't get hopeless about it, because then we might as well go kill ourselves. All is lost. We have to simply keep fighting. And we have to figure out different ways of fighting. I think my biggest issue with a lot of these left-wing thinkers and anti-capitalists and all this is that they are too ideological. They're too ideological, and they're less practical in terms of how you subvert power. And I kind of hate to say this on here because I don't trust these platforms, but it really doesn't matter, because if you execute it right, they can't stop you. I played football, and one of my coaches said stuck with me, because the logic and the reasoning I found to be astute. He said that it doesn't matter if they know what play we're going to do if we execute it right, because the play takes into account how they might respond to the play itself, and it sort of dictates how they have to respond. So it doesn't matter if they know what you're doing if you execute it right. Oftentimes, left-wing thought says, or leftist thought says, anti-capitalist thought says, change from the grassroots, the working class, the proletariat. The people need to come together to resist the elites, the bourgeoisie, the capitalist class, and we can vote them out, or we can simply choose to not participate in the system, or build alternatives so that we're not dependent on the system. And eventually these alternatives will be self-sustaining enough such that we can completely phase out the systems of the bourgeoisie. And
Kyler says yes, sir.
these new what's up, Kyler? These new systems will be more democratic. Okay, fine, all well and good. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? That is quite the undertaking. How are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? They're like, well, we just need to convince enough people. That's not going to fucking happen. That's not going to happen. Why? Because there is the most sophisticated propaganda machine in the history of the fucking world working against you, and you are not allowed into the spaces to impact it in any fucking way, shape, or form. So that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. What I think would make more sense, and it's fucking obvious, is that sort of grassroots groundswell thought is what I call a one-pronged approach. You need what I conceive of as a three-pronged approach, which is to say you attack them from three places. Grassroots, sure, but I need to put in my other headphones. One, from the grassroots, sure. Two, from inside the institutions. From inside the institutions. Economic institutions and the bureaucratic institutions. And then three, from inside the political institutions. You need forces, substantial forces with power within in all three of those spaces, in the grassroots, in the economic institutions / the bureaucratic institutions, and then the political institutions. And then you use the grassroots groundswell as a springboard for total systemic change, right? You don't have, like this, like, let's take the American system right now, for instance. This idea that if we can get enough people to be in support of, let's take Medicare for all, for example, that we're going to get free healthcare. No, the fuck we're not. No, the fuck we're not. How do we know that? Because the majority of the country has supported free healthcare since like the fucking 1800s, and we still don't have it. So it's not a matter of having enough people. It's not a matter of simply having enough people. No, it's a matter of subverting how the power manifests and operates and where it does that. Yes, you need enough people to support it. And then you need people within these institutions reflecting that, or putting forth substantial enough dissent within the institutions themselves. And yes, the institutions have correcting mechanisms as to phase out these people, but that's where you need to attack. That's where you need to attack. There's not enough attacking there. You need people in corporate offices. You need people in banks. You need people who are extremely anti-capitalist minded, who are working to enrich the capitalists. Why? Because they need to be in those spaces to subvert them when the time comes. You need people who are extremely anti-capitalist, who are the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Like, well, if somebody's a anti-capitalist, why would they be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company? Because now they have influence within the system that they want to overthrow, such that when there is a groundswell, they can say, hey, you know what, guys, I think this makes more sense. And if they're already the fucking leader of the place, guess what? It makes it a lot easier to make that change happen. It needs to be a three-pronged approach. You need to attack from every possible facet. Grassroots groundswell is not going to be enough. It's not. It's not. And you have this machine working against you. You need to attack it everywhere. In the corporations, in the bureaucracies and in the halls of power.
Big Philly is going off.
That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. And it needn't be this like overly coordinated organization. People simply need to decide. There are people who are on the ground who are doing grassroots work and teaching people about these issues, about the history of these issues, and championing specific causes. Great. We need people in the corporations who hold these beliefs, ideals, this understanding at the top level of these corporations, the top level of these bureaucracies. Well, then they're going to have to act against their beliefs. Yeah. It's fucking game theory. This is war. It's a battle. You can't just like let your opponents know exactly what the fuck you think. You have to hide your hand. You know why the elites lie non-fucking stop? Because it fucking works. That's why. Because it works. Because when your opponents don't know your intentions, your chances of succeeding are higher.
Big Philly says, do you think we can slowly progress towards anti-capitalism where it needs to be a revolution?
We can slowly progress to it the way I just described. A revolution would never work because they would kill us all before that happens. They would kill us all. But they won't have to kill us all. They would just have to kill enough people to scare everyone else into submission. They will kill enough people to scare everyone else into submission. That's what they've always done. It works all the time.
Big Philly says right.
You need to infiltrate the institutions of power and put on, talk like them, walk like them, act like them, perpetuate their interest, and don't lie to yourself about why you're doing it. Because oftentimes what happens is that these people go in with the best of intentions and then they get tantalized by all this wealth and power, and then they start making justifications for why they're going against their ideals. It's being so fucking weak-minded. Yeah, you're like voting against this bill because you know this gas corporation, this fuel corporation is going to donate to your campaign. Fine, that's already the system. Fine, but like, what is your 20-year plan such that you've built enough influence across the board in these various institutions that there comes a point where you have enough numbers everywhere that you can put forth an agenda that they can't resist because you have the numbers. Sure, play their game for 20 years until you get power. Look like them, talk like them, think like them if you fucking have to. And know that you're doing it for this fucking reason. And keep focused on that. And everyone does that across the board. But instead, people start to justify, oh, well, you know, it's actually okay that people work until they fucking die. Oh, it's actually okay. No, it's not. No, it's not. You need leaders that aren't weak-minded. You need leaders who aren't like naive. You need leaders who are willing to play the game, but play it to win. And when I say win, I mean enact their fucking ideals, not just get rich or get power. No, like make what they want to happen, happen. And that needs to be across the board in the corporations, in the bureaucracies, in Congress, in the Senate, on the ground. And they don't even have to coordinate. They don't even have to coordinate because they already know the policies that are necessary. And by being in the spaces, you know how they operate, so you know how to subvert them. And you can more easily conceive of a replacement-like system. And even if you wanted to coordinate, you can, and they couldn't stop you because you're everywhere. That is the only way. That is the only way. That is the only way. Anything else, they'll just murder a bunch of people and scare everybody. If you try to do it through like voting, they'll subvert the votes. They'll manipulate people to vote against their interest, to think white supremacy is more important than their health care, to think the immigrants are more scary than them not having a retirement. And the cycle will just repeat.
Enough money to afford rent. As the Southern Poverty Law Center Deputy Legal Director for Economic Justice.
Like, okay, yeah, sure. I'll sell my soul and go work at a healthcare company and become the CEO. And then when we're deciding which individual to donate to their campaign, there's this person who seems like a moderate, but see, and this is what they do. They use dog whistles, but they are using dog whistles in a way that communicates their ideologies. We can do that too. Sure, this person like ostensibly seems like a centrist, or they might even seem like right wing, but they're using specific terms that I know that, they understand that at the end of the day, we want to destroy this entire system. Yeah, put them into power. Let's get more of them in there. Oh, Congress has 400 seats. Oh, look, it's been 20 years and there's 300 of them in there. The Senate has 100. Oh, look, it's been 20 years and there's 80 of them in there. And most of the Fortune 500 companies have all these people who are like-minded, who've been acting against everything they believe up till now. That's not impossible. We're human beings. We can fucking do whatever we want. We can think whatever we want. We can sacrifice. We can act. We can pretend. That is the only way to do it. You know why that? Again, the reason they lie and they use subversion and subterfuge is because it works. But these leftists are too fucking high-minded and moral. They're like, no, we're gonna come and bring people together and be like, yeah, let's fucking hold hands and sing songs and be like, you can't walk here. You gotta stop. Shame. You think these people care about shame? They fucking rape and murder children. They don't care about shame. The fuck are you talking about? Oh, God is gonna judge you. What are you talking? You're confused. You're insane. It's not gonna work. The people on the ground doing the grassroots stuff, they need to do their job because the public needs to be educated about it. But not everyone needs to be doing this. Some people need to go work for those corporations and get in leadership positions, need to go work for those bureaucracies and get in leadership positions. And yes, do the dirt if you have to, but don't fucking convince yourself you're doing the dirt because, oh, well, it can't be helped. It needs to be done. No, you know it can't be helped. You know it doesn't need to be done, but you're doing it for the very reason of, and then people be like, well, then aren't you part of the problem? Yes, you're going to have to be part of the problem for a little bit. The problem isn't going to just fucking stop because you choose to not participate in it. Right now, if I choose to not participate in capitalism, guess what? Capitalism is going to fucking go anywhere. Well, if everyone chose to not participate, you can't get everyone to choose to not participate because there's no alternative. Well, we can build alternatives. How? You don't have any resources. Well, if we convince everyone, you can't convince everyone because there's a major propaganda machine standing in the way. And you don't have the resources or capital to develop an alternative to that. And there's only so many people you can talk to in person.
Kirsten Anderson stated, the Supreme Court held that it is a crime to be homeless. At a moment in which housing is unaffordable.
Well, when people start to do these things, they start to justify, because they're fucking weak-minded. Don't justify. Be like, I know I just supported this thing that's going to destroy Social Security. If it means that I now run the Social Security Administration, so be it. You know why? Because you're just a cog in the machine. They want to destroy Social Security. It doesn't fucking matter if you're the one who sits there and does it.
They're going to replace you with somebody else and still fucking destroy Social Security. But that person that they replace you with might not be an anti-capitalist, such that when they are in the position of power, now they can make the decision. Now they hold the reins to power. Make sure it's you. Make sure it's you. You don't fucking forget while you're doing it, while you're there. And make sure there are others in all these places who are thinking and doing the same things. That's the only way. That's the only way. While there is a huge grassroots groundswell. But it can't just be that. That will never work. How do we know that? Because people have been doing that forever. There have been countless revolutions. And guess what? The elites still control the world. The world is still ruled by a small few group of people. There have been endless revolutions in Europe, in the UK, in Africa, in Asia. The elites still run the world. So grassroots revolution obviously doesn't work. Well, you know, there's like slow but gradual change. No, there isn't. No, there isn't. They just reframe things. We still have nobles and lords. They're just called billionaires now, and celebrities and high government officials. Just fucking change the names. They still commit all manner of atrocities under the sun and get away with it. Is that not what's happening? Is that not what's happening? Is that not what's happening?
Movies.
For half the people in the country, proving that it continues to be out of touch with the American public. This is the theme of today, is the relation between capitalism and poverty and homelessness, and how out of touch the dominant narrative is, backed by economic models that are themselves out of touch.
Hi, we're Charity Water. If we lost you at Charity, we get it.
We are here today to discuss these issues with Rob Robinson, a very special guest. Rob teaches
What's
at
up,
the
Sean
New
Story?
School
What's going
and
on?
at the City College of New York City, where he just recently received an honorary doctorate. Rob was
What's up,
homeless for over 2 years after he lost his job in 2021, lived in the streets of Miami, and then in the shelters of New York City. Rob is someone who's since then been at the forefront of the housing movement and struggle, not only in the United States and in New York, but globally, in touch with the homeless populations and their movements in Hungary, Germany, South Africa, and Brazil. Before we get into our discussion, I would like to start with a more systemic question, which is, what is the relationship between our capitalist economy and poverty and homelessness more broadly?
So homelessness is a direct result of poverty in America. The numbers have increased as long as wages continue to stay stagnant and the price of housing goes up, we're going to see people at risk of homelessness. But it's been exacerbated by the way capitalism plays out in different economies, particularly in New York City. So to handle this issue, New York City spends about $3 billion a year to temporarily house people in shelters. It's not a long-term solution, it's a short-term solution, but they give this work to not-for-profit organizations. So even though they're not-for-profit organizations, they don't want it to go away because they're receiving massive amounts of money from the city. And I think that carries out at other places around the country. Not to the degree that it does in New York City,
What's up, George?
but we see a direct relationship. Also the fact that jobs, the only jobs available
George
in this
Padilla
country
says it's
are
the Charleston
service
White.
industry jobs that don't pay a living wage. People are always at
I
risk
don't
of
think so,
homelessness.
no.
So it's a system that is oppressing already oppressed people.
Rob, let's bring the conversation up to the present moment. We know that 1 out of 2 full-time American workers cannot afford their basic needs, including housing. Let's look at the deeper roots of the problem. Given that the current situation is one that tends to instead point the finger to the individual rather than to the system. We're going to listen to our conversation of a couple months ago and then get back with the most important questions about the current situation and also the current hopes, especially in New York, with the electoral campaign of Zoran Mandami.
I think that what we need to do, there are a few things we need to do in terms of allowing the private market to play a more significant role in the construction of additional housing supply.
You
That
need
includes
people
ending the
like
requirement
Zion,
to build
and you
parking
also
lots
need
when we're
people who
constructing
are
housing.
in the
That
police
means
department
increasing
who are
density around mass transit
anti-capitalist
hubs. That
and
means upzoning
anti-police.
wealthier neighborhoods that have historically
And you need
not
people who are
contributed
outside
to
the police
housing
department who are
production. What makes our
anti-capitalist
campaign
and
distinct
anti-police.
is in tandem with that.
Right.
I also believe that the public sector has a role to play in building immediately affordable housing.
Because you know what makes it easy to defund the police when there's a grassroots movement asking to defund the police, and like half the police chief in the country are anti-police. Well, it's like, well, why would you be a police chief if you're anti-police? Because you're able to fucking think and act strategically, and you're not naive to how these systems work. And you know that there's power within these institutions, and you need to be able to move those levers of power. And grassroots groundswell is necessary, but it's not enough. It's not enough. It needs to happen in tandem with other things. Imagine there's like half the politicians are in support of defunding the police, half the country, and then half the people within the police departments themselves. That shit's gonna happen. I was like, well, if that's how they make their money, then they won't. Well, they have an exit strategy because they don't actually give a fuck about this thing. It's a means to an end. And whatever system is produced to counter it will be able to absorb those people. Because obviously, if you're anti-capitalist, you don't want people to just like lose their jobs in drove and like be destitute in the streets. Come on.
We would like to begin discussing with you the numbers, the statistics. Indeed, part of the fetishism for economics derives from the fact that apparently economists are the only ones who can master numbers, relying on statistics as hard data that is ultimately objective and indisputable. Now, what we see is that clearly statistics are quite interpretative, and often, especially when it is about tracking failures of our capitalist economy, they tend to underestimate the actual historical issues. And this is, I guess, really emblematic in the case of homelessness as one of the, I would say, most obvious signs of the decadence of our capitalist economy. In the United States, we have a number that is over 771,000 homeless people for 2024. But this is a gross undercount.
How are we doing?
Can you tell us a little bit
NBLE6.
about these statistics and why one has to be very critical about them and wary of where they come from and how they are collected?
First, Clara, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I'm one that a community member, and generally, we always thought of, particularly underserved communities, always thought of data collection as security. But I'm a believer data can be used for or against your argument, right? So we need to adapt the fact that if that's what the power brokers
Big
are
Philly says
interpreting, then we
Philadelphia
have
has
to make
actually
sure
made
we
some
get
good
it out
changes
there
in terms of
to
criminal
tell
justice.
our story. So I think what that
Good.
number, the 771,000 is,
What are
is
some
a
of those
total
changes?
undercount. And what do I mean by that? So our federal government uses a formula that says on the last week of January every year or the first week of February, we're going to go out, we're going to organize people to go out through communities across the U.S. to go out and count people between 12 midnight and 4 a.m. in the morning, right? Whoever's on the street is truly homeless, right? So we try to interview these people by having conversations with them. I make the argument, and always have made the argument, that if you are a person who's homeless, particularly where I come from in New York, where the weather is brutal, the last
How are we
week in
doing?
January, the
Florida.
first week in February, you're not going to be out on the street. You're going to find some place that's warm. People who are homeless are resilient. People who sleep rough, live out on the streets, figure out ways to take care of themselves. So they're not going to be very visible. So your count is flawed. It's flawed from the very time it's done. So for those 4 hours, it's not a count that's real. And it doesn't count people that are or what I like to call the hidden homeless. When you talk about people doubled up, families doubled up, people finding other places to go that just, out of sight and out of mind. So the number is flawed. And I think as you go, it can be done in different parts of the city, right? Based on geographic regions. So it might work the last Monday in January in Miami because it's warm, but it doesn't work in New York. I've always made the argument you want
Big
a true
Billy
count
says
in New
an
York,
RDA
do a
Larry
second
Krasner
count
is
the
left-wing
last
if he
Monday in
doesn't
July
prosecute super
when
harsh on
people are
nonviolent
visible,
crimes.
they surface, they're up in parks, they're visible in the subways. So it's a flawed calculation, I think, from its very creation.
So would it be correct to say that experts estimate that it could be even 3 times as high?
I think we've always used that number in New York City.
What's
It's a
that,
social justice
upside
movement, it's a
down
housing
triangle
movement, it's
for?
a homeless and housing movement in New York.
In your
We've
name.
always said that number has to be tripled when you
I ask 'cause it
figure out
reminds
the
me of
number in New
the-
York City. So whatever number is attributed
sort
by
of
housing
symbol
and
of the
urban
college I
development,
went
you'll
to.
hear me say HUD probably throughout this conversation. That's housing and urban development. That the calculation that they use is not a true reflection of what is happening, right? And so it's always going to be flawed, and you'll always get exceptions to the rule. And in New York City, we've always said it's triple that number at the very least.
Yeah, and I think ultimately the New York City Board of Education gets a bit closer to the reality because they calculate that actually in New York City there are over 144,000 children in public schools who have actually experienced homelessness in 2024, and this is actually the 10th year in which the number is increasing every year. So I guess here the point is that homelessness cannot be attributed, as is still in a way in our legitimizing rhetoric, to the misbehavior of
That's right.
citizens who do not know how to fit in. If children, families are in these conditions, the problem is much more structural.
Absolutely. We've always sidestepped that issue, right? This is a structural problem, and this is a structural problem that has existed since our government started disinvesting in housing, right? For years, public housing was a true social safety net for people in this country. And that's where people who were slipping through the cracks through no fault of their own, mostly economic reasons, right? And I'll pinpoint those economic reasons by saying wages not rising as fast as the cost of housing, right? So it puts people behind the eight ball. That's the fundamental issue that drives homelessness and a lack of housing and poverty, right? We've never addressed poverty in this country. If you do your homework, you know that Malcolm X and Martin Luther King both took bullets to end their life because they were going to the UN to address poverty in this country. So those are the driving forces that create homelessness. But we've gone out of our way in this country to blame the individual. It's your fault. You failed. Anybody can make it in this country. And that is so untrue. And I speak from my own thought process and my own lived experience. It's always been looked at, as you heard my resume, you heard that I was homeless for 2.5 years on the streets of Miami, 10 months in a New York City homeless shelter. But as I got out of homelessness, I started hearing rhetoric and that prevailing narrative of you're homeless because you don't want to work. You're homeless because you don't have an education. You're homeless because you have a chemical or an alcohol addiction. You're homeless because you have mental illness. Well, for me, I started working with my dad in the restaurant business when I was 9 years old. So I'm not lazy. I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Maryland, have an education, never diagnosed with a chemical or alcohol addiction. And that's no reason for us to discard humanity. And the same thing for anybody diagnosed with mental illness. We should show humanity and care and show some mutual aid to help those folks. So those narratives bothered me and always bothered me. And it's what pushed me into this work to try to figure out how do we get around this and how do we push back on these narratives? And there are ways to push back, right? There's now a model of policy that's floating around the world that we basically almost refuse to adapt wholeheartedly in the U.S., and that's a housing first policy. Housing first means somebody who's suffering from a lack of housing should be given given a home, and then bring any support services that they need. But instead, the approach that we're taking in the U.S., we got to fix you first, right? You're broken. So if we fix you, then we can supply it with some housing, right? And I think that's just such a wrong approach.
Fascinating, Rob. So we started off with a critique of statistics and how, of course, the way you collect data matters, and how often instead economists tend to use numbers without paying attention as to how the very collection can have biases, especially in downplaying structural issues. And then the other limit that we just brought up is about the explanation. So not only about how
How are we doing? Can God
information, the
sleeps?
raw information, but also how then do we explain that information. And the explanation is, I think, where really a heterodox approach can be fundamental in economics, because it points exactly to the systemic, rather than pointing to individual behavior, which has been the focus of neoclassical economics, that then has as an assumption that all the burden lies on the behavior of the individual. We know that issues are much larger. And I guess the very basic point that is intuitive but is not stressed enough is how ultimately the issue here is that housing has become a commodity, and as such it does not reflect the logic of satisfying the need of shelter, but the logic of capital accumulation and profit making. And ultimately how this fact that can be tampered with public interventions that ultimately try to decommodify housing has seen a big
How we
limit in especially in recent years, in which actually housing has become one of the primary ways to speculate and ultimately invest into
Subjugation.
predatory speculation, and especially the best place to invest of big private equity funds. So how is it that we can see this in New York, and what can you do to push back against these this ultimately double trend, which is the dismantling of the social resources from the part of governments, both local and federal? So the incapacity to actually have a vision for public housing that is sustainable, connected with the fact that then this becomes really a space to plunder, and thus basically to speculate on housing, and then which brings to an enormous amount of evictions, connected to what you just said, which is of course that wages are too low to even be able to keep up with moderate increases in rentals.
So I think the approach that the housing movements, particularly in New York City, have taken have been multi-pronged. I'll start out with using the human rights framework, meeting people's needs. Everybody needs a home. A home is a place of stability, and it stabilizes your life. So while maybe 10, 15 years
appreciate the
ago,
gift, man.
housing as a human right was a slogan, people are understanding now what it means to meet people's needs. At the same time, they understand the commodification of this particular thing called housing, and how that works against meeting the human right to a home, right? And we have a real contradiction in New York, because we have a right to shelter, right? So it means that on any given night, that the government has an obligation, if you go to the city, to house you in a shelter. It's not a home, right? It's missing all cultural adequacy. It's not meeting your needs in general, right? So we know shelter is a problem, but that shelter industrial complex has expanded to the tune of 600 shelters in New York City. So it's a place basically to warehouse
Thanks for those
bodies,
gifts,
in my
man.
opinion. And I think the fact that New York City sort of farms out this work to not-for-profit organizations, even though they're called quote-unquote not-for-profit organizations, they don't seem to want that money to go away. So when somebody comes along like myself who speaks out against it, you often hear many of these providers, well, Rob,
It's the policy of the Band-Aid solution. We put forth these little fixes, right? Like, oh, let me give someone who's homeless access to a shelter. Give them a home. Give them a home. That solves the problem. Give them a home. You know what happens when you have a home? Life gets a lot easier. It's a lot easier to go to work, to go to the doctor, to not be constantly stressed out and your mind is plagued by these terrorists because you have some stability. Your nervous system can take a breath.
You have a voice, the press, the media comes up to you. Why are you speaking out against shelter? You spent 10 months in the shelter. I said, absolutely. I
JC
spent
says
those
it's
10
blatantly
months and
obvious,
I
very
realized that this is a problem. And how do we undo the shelter industrial complex? So that's how I think outside of the box. I think it's a problem. And I always defend my position with saying,
And they try to make you feel like you're crazy or you're an idiot or you just don't understand the nuances. If you're like, yo, people don't have homes, you know what would fix that? You gave them a fucking home. That fixed it like that. They're like, nah, it's more complicated than that. You just don't get it. You're just a fucking peasant. You're just stupid. Give them a home. Like I said, guys, this is the Forum for Real Economic Emancipation. Again, I stumbled upon this lady and her work like a couple of days ago, and I was taken aback because I think, and like, I always have a problem with everything, and what she's doing, man, I'm like, holy shit, this is how you do it. This is how you do a grassroots education movement. This is how you do it. And so I'm just going to keep coming back to this, playing those videos, and look at the person she has on. Like, this man was homeless, teaches about homelessness, and is doing structural work within New York. That's exactly the person you want talking about these things, not some fucking bozo guy from wherever the hell. What's up, dude?
JC says, and one day Shell disappeared too.
Oh, I don't know if I have both. You can have it. Send me this. I don't. Hopefully not. Hopefully she won't. But like this isn't someone who's doing this work because they want to enrich themselves. Like, she's fine. She's fine. She just actually cares about what's going on. But yeah, I mean, there are unparalleled forces working to suppress this kind of work. So that's not impossible. Hopefully, if people fucking care enough, if people pay attention enough, if people stop being divided enough, the only way that can happen is first we got to build awareness. We have to build awareness. You can't change an issue if you can't even see it. You can't change a problem if you can't even see it. If you don't have the words to articulate it, the language to talk about it.
You'll never hear me say we don't need social workers. We just need them in a different setting. The setting that you all have created has been a profit box. But then the other problem is the commodification of housing and how difficult it is to get a hold of. So we call the housing that's being built in New York that sits empty for speculation, we call it the new safe deposit box. Right?
We're watching a video.
Certain Zionist entities governing that info. We all gotta be like her.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, TikTok is now a Zionist entity. Like, straight up, they control the platform. That's why I keep telling people, please follow the YouTube, follow the Twitch, follow the Kick. I'm on every platform for a reason, because it's harder to suppress when you're omnipresent. That speaks to, I mean, you weren't here, JC, when I was talking about how I would systemically approach these problems. You got to be omnipresent. It's the only way. But yeah, we're talking about the business of poverty. At least this is the name of the video we're watching. It's called The Business of Poverty, How the System Profits from Homelessness. This person is someone who works on homelessness. He was homeless. He went to school to study structural homelessness. He teaches about it. He's working to get rid of shelters and take that money and replace it with just buying people homes, building people homes, putting people in homes instead of putting them in shelters, which don't solve the problem.
JC
And
says, yeah, it's a cash cow. In my city, it's a huge problem too.
It's a cash cow. It's a cash cow. They create these Band-Aid solutions and then they profit from them from the tunes of billions of dollars. And the people who suffer the most, nothing changes for them. Nothing changes for them. But these well-to-do rich folk coming from these like big institutions, and oh yeah, I'm the head of the nonprofit and X, Y, and Z. Like they're making off of millions of dollars.
Right? So you have speculators from outside of the country investing in New York City, right? Investing in these properties, waiting for their profit margin to reach 20%, and then they offload it to somebody. They want to make 20% return on their money. Can't get that from a bank. You can't get that from anywhere else. So, but you can get it in the real estate market. So how do you want to do that? You have to just rethink your relationship to land and housing. And that takes me back to the work I was involved with Take Back the Land. We knew fundamentally we were going to have a problem if we didn't change that fundamental relationship. And land and housing as a commodity will not work for a big section of society. So how do you do it? Well, you start to invest in things like community land trusts, removing land from the speculative market, putting it in land banks, finding creative ways to communally own and govern land. It's a different way of thinking in this country. But you're up against a force. You're up against private equity. You're up against developers who invest a lot of money, invest in politicians to see it their way. So it's challenges. Not easy work to do, but the organizing is happening in these communities now. And I would hope, I think we're still short on popular and political education, because you can go into a community that is being oppressed by these issues and talk about capitalism. And often I'm met with, you're bringing those heady subjects into the community, Rob. You know, we just need a home. Well, you don't have a home because of this economic system that we live on.
This is exactly what I'm trying to say. Like, and I mean, we see it on this channel here. You're trying to talk about the things that keep people's lives in this servile state, keep them in perpetual poverty, and they've been taught that they should like be adverse to hearing about these things, that it's above their ability to conceive of. No, the fuck it's not. And you need to be thinking about it. You need to be thinking in these terms, because you can't solve the problem if you don't understand it. And guess what? They're not going to come solve it for you. Their solutions are Band-Aid solutions that keep you in the state that you're in. You need to solve it for you together with the people who are going through it with you. But you can't if you don't fucking understand it. You need to understand it. And not in some like heady conspiracy theory way. No, you need to understand it logistically, how it operates.
And you have to understand how it operates, right? And you have to understand the role of workers in
JC says
society.
real estate
That's where I
profit
think
too.
people are waking
There's
up. The
buildings in
more I
homeless
talk
rural
about the
areas
role
and
of
they drop.
workers in society and how
says guess
you
who
are
buys
making the 1% wealthier, and your accumulation of stuff, for lack of a better way to say it, is really working
Private
against you.
equity.
And I think now folks are starting to wake up to these issues in a way that I hadn't seen them wake up to in years. So.
Institutions behind the shelters. Who?
I just built a budgeting app in Base 44. Guys.
Yeah, it's.
I'm genuinely asking, I don't know.
Another problem that
Please
often,
teach me something.
appears in mainstream economics is the compartmentalization of issues. This is not just a problem of the market of the housing market. It's a problem of the relations of production.
JC
And
says out of
we
seven
see
investors.
actually that the experts.
That makes a lot of sense. That's where the money's at. That's where the money's at. That's where the money's at. Get to those cheap markets. Get your return.
Tell us that over half of the homeless population in the United States works. The point is, what type of work are we talking about? Not only is it work that ultimately is dependent on the employer, on what is being produced and how much you get to keep in your paycheck, it's also work that is constantly made by a design more precarious.
says
That's
right?
right. That's
So
right. How much
actually,
is out?
I walked into a Dollar Tree just the other week, and I spoke to the cashier to show her the flyer, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, you know, I know more homeless people than non-homeless people, and I'm homeless myself because I'm making $11 an hour as a night manager, and I can only work up to 19 hours a week." To keep, you know, and she
How
didn't
we
tell
doing?
me the reason,
Mighty
but clearly the
Don Juan.
reason is so that she can be off benefits as a part-time worker. So the connection between the housing struggle with the general struggle for like changing really how we approach the very production of resources is key. So did you see this happening also in the other countries you participated in? How different were these different movements in different parts of the world?
I don't think it was too much different. And I think in some instances they're way ahead of us because they understood it better. They were willing to engage in the popular and political education to understand this economic system that we live under and push back on it. So I was always fascinated, particularly in places like Barcelona. And, when I go to Brazil and working with the social movements down there, I've been at the MST school in Sao Paulo numerous times. I've taken that 6-week course. And part of the underpinning of that education there is all about the economic system and how it negatively affects us. So I think outside of the U.S., there is more knowledge on how the economic system negatively affects our lives. But I think we are learning here because what happens is what is working against us are transnational corporations, right? So you can have a corporation that might be based in the U.S., but affecting these social movements around the world. And the biggest example of that is a housing movement called a housing group called Blackstone, private equity firm, which is probably the largest owner of housing in the world. And you have groups in Spain that are pushing back against this group. And as far back as 2013, they were coming to the U.S. to say, we need you all to help us because we're fighting against this big conglomerate that has its main offices on Park Avenue in New York City. So we need you to stand side by side to protest with us. And I think things like that start to bubble up and people start to understand it a little bit better.
It's a global issue.
It's
a global issue. It's a global issue.
Popular and political education is necessary in the U.S. in an ongoing basis to learn from these other movements. However, I want to be real. I still think there's some pushback when it comes to internationalism. I often, as an organizer, I feel alone many times by coming back from Barcelona, coming back from Sao Paulo, Brazil, or coming back from Berlin, Germany, and talking about what I witnessed over there and how I witnessed. And I would get a reaction. Yeah.
So I think it's very important what he's talking about. I mean, everything he's saying is very important, but listen to his caution about internationalism. Like, people push back against this idea that it's a global issue and we need to come together in global solidarity. Why? Because they are indoctrinated into nationalism. Nationalism is another separatist ideology that I talk about. What is a separatist ideology? Simply a way of thinking, groups of ideas that work to separate people from one another. Nationalism does that. It says you are a person who is from this particular nation, and these are the people who are like you, and other people who are not from this nation are not like you. It separates people from others. And we see it unfolding right here in what he's talking about. Oh, I'm American. I don't know about those Brazilians. I don't know about those Spanish people. I don't know about those Kenyans. I don't know about those South Africans. I'm just worried about America. It's a global issue. The same forces that are perpetuating this problem for you is perpetuating this problem for them. You cannot hope to defeat it alone in your own country by yourself. You need to work in concert with them, in tandem with them. But you won't.
A bunch because you are preaching brother.
Thanks, man. But you won't because you've been indoctrinated into nationalism, another separatist ideology. What are some quick examples, real quick, of separatist ideology? Because I think it's important that people know. Sexism, racism, homophobia, patriarchy, ableism, ageism, nationalism. These are the big ones. Classism. There's a lot of them. And they all work to separate. They all work to separate people. Yes, there does. But what does that uprising look like? And how do we make it happen? We need to be talking about it. We need to be having conversations, but we're not even at the point where we're having conversations. People don't talk about it. People don't want to hear about it. It's stressful. Brother, there's like 3 people in this chat. Like, no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about it.
this channel, these people in this video have dedicated their entire lives to this. This video barely has views. Yeah, it has 22K views, but
because it brings discomfort.
it brings discomfort. Yes, it makes them uncomfortable. It makes them uncomfortable, so they avoid. And I get that impulse, I get that inclination, but we have to resist it. Because if we avoid the people who are being so impacted by it, if we avoid it, it's never gonna fucking change. It's never going to change because they're not coming to save you. Your lords and the people who consider themselves your betters and the celebrities and the academic and Ivy League halls, they're not coming to save you.
It's rare to find TBH.
They're not coming to save you.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. I know.
Well,
you know,
I mean, you know, and I'm not gonna like sit here and say it's all people's fault. They're fucking living through hell. They're living through hell. It's psychological oppression. It's physical oppression. It's economic oppression. It's division. It's fear. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. But we need to stand tall and stand against, because that's our only hope.
Different over there, and there's almost an exceptionalism that can. I don't know any other way to explain. I think it's an exceptionalism, as if we do everything better here, and I'm not a believer in that. You know, I've witnessed firsthand the changes. I've stood on the streets of Barcelona when a family was about to be evicted, and 150 people show up, including yours truly, 3 years ago, Thanksgiving week, and I watched LaPaz negotiate with the lawyers on the street.
I often have a hard time sleeping because these things are on my mind, and I need people to care about them, because we can never change them if people don't care about them.
International folks who are witnessing what's going on here.
I think
changes the landscape.
it's good that we think about them, and you know, we like also need to protect our bodies, right? Like we can't resist if we're too tired to even get up, but like we need to think about them. We need to think about them. We need to talk about them. Like, bro, in my friend circles, like this is all the things I'm talking about. Like, folks around me are tired of me. They're like, oh my God, here he goes again. I'm like, you need to fucking hear it.
Is the real wealth.
You need to hear it. You need to hear it, like, oh, here he goes again with structural inequality and oh my God, the isms. I'm like, yeah, I'm never gonna not be talking about it, because brother, you need to talk about it. We need to talk about it. You can't avoid it. There was a kid in here who argued with me for like 30 minutes, and after the fact was like, okay, you're right, but I can't like talk to anyone in my life about this because they'll think I'm crazy or laugh at me. I'm like, yeah, I get it.
He's making us feel uncomfortable.
You said it, brother. You said it. You said it.
Participating in very similar struggles because they share fundamental needs that this economic system is not really able to grant them, because it's not meant to grant them. Again, it's not about the system failing in general. It's working for the objective it's supposed to work for, which is enrich the richest and speculators. But it's not working to satisfy needs.
That's right.
It's very important that we don't think that if the economy goes well, these problems will be solved automatically, because again, our economy is never really meant to satisfy these needs for people. So the fact that people can come together in these struggles is interesting. And also how is it that ultimately participating in these struggles by pressuring for the right to housing allows you also to maybe become more creative about what housing should look like in the first place, and how to actually take back spaces of communal existence that are indeed
JC says jeopardizing our comfort sucks, but imagine the comfort you'll have if we had victory.
Insulated from the
Exactly. Of course. If we have to be uncomfortable for 10 years to be liberated for the rest of our lives. Give me discomfort for 10 years. Because guess what? The alternative is discomfort for the rest of your fucking lives. Yeah, it's a discomfort you're more used to, but guess what? It's fucking uncomfortable. Even the people who profit the most from this system are uncomfortable. They have to constantly lie to themselves and find all these ways to convince themselves that what they're doing is right, to turn a blind eye from all the death and destruction that they're perpetuating. Even they aren't comfortable. The people who benefit from this the most, they have to kill their humanity to be able to continue to perpetuate this system.
Capitalist dynamics that ultimately dehumanize a lot of us, even if we are amongst those who, are not suffering the most.
I think a big part of it for me and my understanding is I start with constitutions and progressive and non-progressive constitutions. So we have a constitution in this country written 250 years ago. It's written in a certain language. It starts out with the line, "We the people." And I repeatedly ask as I lecture at law schools, who were those people? Because people that looked like me were considered 3/5 of a man. We weren't even a human, right? Women didn't count. So it served the needs of a select few. But then when I take a closer look at...
I'm willing to fight the rest of my life for it, bro. If it means my grandkids, your grandkids have the world that we wish we lived in, so be it. So be it. So be it. If I have to dedicate the rest of my life to that for them to have that, so fucking be it. So be it. So be it. What else am I doing? What other cause is more worthy of my time?
Newer constitutions, post-dictatorship Brazil, 1985 Constitution.
People are so desperate for purpose, and there's a clear purpose right in their face. But they're like, oh no, let me get money, or let me sit down all day talking to some imaginary deity that's going to solve all my problems, but somehow hasn't solved all my problems yet, or any problem really. And things are really fucking horrible, and things are going really bad, and all the people who are doing the worst things are the richest people in the world. But I'm more comfortable with this.
Strongly create good time, then the cycle starts over. It'll happen, bro. We gotta carry M.
That's all we got to do, man. We just got to keep fighting. We got to keep fighting. We got to come together, and we have to be creative. We have to be strategic in our approach. We have to be omnipresent in our approach. We have to be everywhere, attacking them everywhere they manifest, in the system, outside of the system.
JC says strong men create good times.
Indeed. But what does that strength look like? What this capitalist society tells us is that strength looks like economic domination of those without. That is not strength. Strength is not to oppress the weak. Strength is to resist power. Courage is to act in spite of fear. Is to resist the powerful. That's strength. You're not strong because you pick on people who are weaker than you. You're strong because you challenge power.
That says land has to serve a social purpose or function. Growing food or housing people. Wow, what a difference, right? The Constitution of South Africa, written post-apartheid 1996, says housing is a human right. In their constitution, it's language in their constitution. You may not always actualize it, but you have a fight because it's written in black and white. So you have groups going into constitutional court and winning, right? The equivalent of our Supreme Court. I make the argument that we have a constitution, 250 years old, written in a certain language that houses our civil law. So if our civil law is framed by a constitution that's flawed, then our civil law is flawed. So I'd rather believe in international human rights law, which gives you reasons why housing is a human right, and the arguments that we can make on behalf of housing as a human right, versus the commodification of housing, and if you don't have the money or you can't afford to pay, you can't have. That's problematic. And I think until we start to educate ourselves and embrace international human rights law instead of calling ourselves this great democracy and separating ourselves from that, we're going to have problems. So I think we have to go a long way to educating people around this issue. Now, that's also a challenge because people can get insulted when you say you want to educate them. But I make the argument.
Let's bring that back.
To go a long way to educating people around this issue. Now, that's also a challenge. Ourselves this great democracy and separating ourselves from that, we're going to have problems. So I think we have to go a long way to educating people around this issue. Now, that's also a challenge because people can get insulted when you say you want to educate them. But I make the argument after coming out of homelessness, I got transformed and I had to re-educate myself because
People get insulted when you dare say you want to educate them. It happens here all the time. Oh, you think you know better about this thing? And guys, I'm sorry. Like, I'm gonna tell it how it is because we don't have time. Like, look outside, shit's terrible. Like, I keep telling people, like, forget your insecurities for a second. Forget your insecurities and try to listen and learn. People get like insecure. Well, if you're saying you're going to educate me on something, then you're saying I know less than you about this thing. Are you calling me dumb? Are you calling me stupid? And then their insecurities flare up and they get defensive and they turn their brains off. They turn their ears off. And it's just you're talking to a fucking wall. Because that's another thing we've been socialized into, this like binary idea of intelligence. You're either smart or you're not. You either know everything or you don't. We're all ignorant about something. We're all ignorant in a lot of ways. I'm really fucking ignorant. And there are things I know a lot about because I spend a lot of time learning about it. So the things I spend a lot of time learning about that you don't spend a lot of time learning about, let me inform you a little bit about those things. I'm sure there are tons of things that I don't pay attention to that you do that you can inform me in. And now shut the fuck up and listen. But everyone wants to act like they know and they have an opinion about everything. How the fuck can you have an opinion about everything? You don't know about everything, but you have an opinion about everything? How is that possible?
Because there were certain values and things that were instilled in me the first half of my life that didn't play out the right way the second half. And I said, time to do a brain dump, learn the world all over again. So, part of it, and I'll always make this argument, is on the individual, right? I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody that they should go through what I went through, 2.5 years on the streets of Miami, 10 months in a homeless shelter to become transformed. But oh boy, what a difference when you become transformed and you see the world through a different lens, right? And the lens that doesn't work for you is pushed to the side and you see this clear lens called the right to housing and just the so-called democracy of the U.S. is not really a democracy that it was drilled into your head in the first part of your life.
It's not a democracy at all.
Also realize
we're gonna finish this video later because it's an hour long and I need to get some sleep. I'm gonna save it. But I mean, this entire channel is a treasure trove. I'm gonna add the link to this video in here for folks, but so far, all I've seen from these people is great work and an ability to articulate the problems in a way that is accessible without losing the substance. All we can do is fight. All we can do is fight. All we can do is build our awareness. All we can do is come together. All we can do is continue the fight. There have been people for centuries who've been doing this fight, and they're the reason that we even have what we have. They're the reason we have weekends. They're the reason we have a 40-hour work week instead of a 60-hour fucking work week. They are the reason that we have Social Security. They're the reason that we have unemployment. They're the reason that we have all the things that make it a little easier because they fought their entire lives to give it to us. And for that, I'm thankful. People often ask, like, if I'm religious. No, but I believe in the efforts of those people. We'll catch you later, chat. Be well, guys.